Hello! Today I will be talking about peer observation and how it can be used in English language teaching as a professional development tool. Sometimes peer observation can be seen as busy work, or it can even be anxiety inducing. However, today I will make the case that it is a useful tool that can play a critical role in teacher growth for both parties, both the observed and the teacher doing the observing. To make this case, I will start by sharing the theoretical framework supporting the use of this tool, then describe some tools that can be used in the process, and finally, I will share my own experiences observing and being observed as a teacher and explain how these experiences help me grow as a teacher. We will start by defining what peer observation is. It is a reciprocal process of observation and reflection. To ground this in the literature, we must distinguish between evaluation and development. An administrator or principal might observe a teacher to decide if they should continue working at the institution the next year. This would be evaluation. Development, however, focuses on the teachers improving their teaching, not on evaluating the competence of the teacher. Gosling, in his 2002 book, outlines three models of teacher observation. The one that we will be looking at today is the peer review model, where the observer and observed are equals. The key principle here is that the observation is non-evaluative. Instead, the focus is on teachers helping each other developing their teaching practice and becoming better teachers. The power does not sit with an administrator, it sits with the teachers. Richard and Farrell, in 2005, seminal figures in ELT, position this activity as a form of collaborative inquiry. It shifts the teacher's role from a passive receiver of feedback to an active researcher in their own classroom. The focus is on teachers working together, identifying weak spots, and deciding together how they might solve those problems that arise in the classroom. When we look at the key terms, we see that non-evaluative is a keyword. As I mentioned earlier, the goal is evaluation for not evaluation of performance, but professional development. Theoretically, this relies heavily on Donald Schoen's concept of reflective practice. Schoen argued that professionals grow by reflecting on action. In English language teaching, it is difficult to teach and reflect simultaneously. Here, peer observation provides us the data, the external set of eyes that make deep reflection possible. Using the tools that we will talk about in the next slides, the observer can give valuable data to the teacher. This data can take the form of informal observations, teaching notes, and formal tools that can all help the teacher realize more about their teaching through the eyes of others. Teacher autonomy is also important here. We are not talking about a mentor teacher telling a younger teacher what to do, but two peers helping each other out, pointing out weaknesses, and learning through observing each other. We can not do this if teachers are not autonomous and ready to own their own opinions and teaching practices. Now, I want to look at two example tools that can be used in peer observation. Of course, there are many different ways peer observations can be conducted. However, peer observations are most beneficial if the observer has something specific to measure or observe, as it helps focus their attention and gives them something specific to give feedback on. If a teacher is aware of certain weaknesses, that teacher might request specific feedback on one aspect of her or his teaching before the observation even begins, so that the observer knows what to focus on. More general schemes can be used to give the observer more flexibility. For example, the observer can simply take notes on teaching strengths or areas to be improved. However, collecting specific data on things like number of interactions, number of times L1 is used, board use, teacher time, and student talk time can give the observed teacher very useful data that they normally wouldn't have access to. One example chart from the Classroom Observation Tasks, a research book for language teachers and trainers, can be seen on this slide. Here, the observer makes specific notes about topics such as goals, inputs, and teacher and learner roles. Another example chart can be seen here. The observer can make observations about specific teacher and student interactions. Such observations can help teachers better understand the classroom dynamics. For example, they might notice that certain groups only interact among themselves. Or they might notice that there is a certain section that interacts less than the other part of the classroom. Becoming aware of these patterns is the first step to making sure that all students are interacting with each other and the teacher in an active, healthy way. In addition to the number of interactions, things like negative interactions or positive interactions could also be marked on this seating chart, especially if there were significant classroom issues, culture at play. Now, I want to tell you more about my personal experience with observation. My first experience might not actually be true peer observation, as I was a short-term teacher observing a full-time teacher to help me get adjusted to the climate of that institution. I worked at English First in New York as a summer teacher, and as part of our initial adaptation period, they had us observe a full-time staff member who taught there. The observation helped me understand the unique culture of that institution. Because it was a very international school with a very diverse student body, observing a class before I started teaching was very helpful because it gave me an idea of what was expected. It also gave me an idea of how their specific materials were used and the techniques that the teachers there tended to use. And then when I think of my experiences at Marmara University observing and being observed, I think back to the definition of observation, which is a reciprocal process of observation and reflection. The fact that it was reciprocal means I was both observed and I also got a chance to observe my partner teacher, and I gained a lot from both of these experiences. And then the second part of the definition, observation and reflection, were also very key in my own experiences as well. Let me give you a few examples so you understand better what I mean by this. For example, when I was observed, the first time the observer used a more general tool to give me feedback, and one of the things that she pointed out was that I could use the whiteboard more effectively. For example, when we do grammar exercises, I was sometimes having my students just verbally tell me their answers. But some of the weaker students who maybe had difficulty with English listening could not catch all of the answers verbally, so she recommended that I think about my use of the whiteboard, and I did reflect on my use. I started using it more in my teaching, started using it more intentionally when I was teaching them new words or any sentence or word that I think they might not be able to catch verbally. I became more aware of that and started using the whiteboard more extensively. And then in the second observation, we decided that that would be the particular focus that we would focus on. So she observed, and then again, she gave me some more notes to reflect on, which again, when we look at the literature, that's one thing that they say is helpful for observation is it gives us data that we would not otherwise have, because as a teacher I can not constantly be monitoring exactly how many times do I use the whiteboard, what do I use it for, do I use it enough, because I'm also answering student questions, thinking about how to explain grammar. So having someone from the outside observe me and focus on that specific data gave me an extra pair of eyes that I normally wouldn't have access to. So that was one aspect of observation, that it taught me the value of data and having another external pair of eyes. to show me what I was doing in the classroom. And then when I observed my partner teacher, it was also helpful because I could reflect on the techniques that she used, how they might differ from the ones that I typically use in the classroom, and the advantages and disadvantages of both of them. For example, when I teach reading, I often give my students a few minutes to silently read the passage. But when she taught reading, she had the class read it out loud. I think there were advantages and disadvantages of both, so I actually haven't significantly changed my technique. Sometimes I do have my students read something out loud, depending on the situation, and after the class, I could have a discussion with her about when that was effective, why that might be more or less effective in different situations, so that mutual reflection also helped me better understand. It gave me a new perspective on teaching reading. For example, she brought up points related to pronunciation, that it gives you a chance to correct student pronunciation. And it also gave me a chance to reflect on some of the positive aspects of students reading silently, that they have more time to understand. Not all students can follow when it's being read aloud. So to sum it all up, both observing and being observed gave me a lot of chances to reflect and to have some external data that proved to be very helpful. Thank you for listening, and here are my references.